without any additions, without the extra addition of attachment. The second set of khandhas are the groups of clinging. And this is when the mind is conditioned in a certain way so that there arises the thought of I. I am thinking. I am the thinking. I am the body. I am the awareness. Or the thinking is mine. The feelings are mine. When this attachment of I or mine arises towards the khandhas, we call these the groups of clinging, or the upadana khandhas. Upadana means attachment. So the upadana khandhas are the aggregates of attachment. When this happens, then there is this weight and burden is placed upon the five khandhas. And so the khandhas become very, very heavy through this attachment to them as I or mine. The Buddha said that in his first sermon, when he was explaining what dukkha was, he summarized all dukkha by saying the five upadana khandhas are dukkha. So this second set of khandhas is what dukkha is all about. Attachment to body, feelings, perceptions, thinking, and bare awareness. This is the meaning of dukkha. So there's the first set when attachment has not arisen. We can call these the mere khandhas. And then the second set, when there is attachment, is the upadana khandhas, or groups of clinging. Then there is a third set of five khandhas. This is the set of khandhas that arises, or that is, maybe I should say, remains after one has practiced meditation and developed and trained the mind. Once the mind has been developed high enough so that attachment no longer arises, once this conditioning of attachment has been cut off, then there remain five khandhas. And these are khandhas where there is no more and never again will be any attachment to them as I or mine. These are the five khandhas of the Arahant. These five khandhas, these pure khandhas, are found in the Arahant, the enlightened being, the perfected being. This is the meaning of perfection, to remove the attachment so that there are only pure khandhas remaining. So we have these three kinds of khandhas, the mere khandhas, and these are happening in our experience. There will be moments when we are truly at ease, when there are no weights or burdens on the mind. These are moments when the mind is free of all attachment. That's when there are the mere khandhas. And then there are the moments that are conditioned where there are the upadana khandhas because of attachment to the five khandhas and to each of the khandhas. And then last of all is the third set, when attachment has ended, when dukkha has been ended, and there only remain the pure khandhas of the perfected one, the Arahant. So these are the three different sets of khandhas which you ought to know about. Through the practice of vipassana, the mind is developed to a degree where there is no more upadana towards the five khandhas. Through this development of the mind, there is no more attachment to the five khandhas. This is the result of the practice, the correct practice of vipassana. When we say vipassana, we're not talking about a certain way of sitting, a certain way of walking, going to the toilet, or a way of playing with your breath. We're not talking about any physical activity. Vipassana is the clear seeing of the way things are, the clear seeing of the nature of reality. When there is this seeing, then there is vipassana. Through vipassana, the mind is developed, and developed to the degree where the attachments cease, and then what remains are the pure khandhas of the enlightened mind, of the arahant. The minds of most beings have moments of cleanness, of lightness, of calmness, when there is no attachment to the 5 khandhas. But then there will arise attachment to one of the khandhas, to this khandha or to that khandha. And then the mind is clouded and darkened and burdened through this attachment. A mind that still has the potential for an attachment is a mind that is not yet pure. It has not been developed fully. The practice of vipassana has not been completed. It may be occurring, and so the mind is being cleaned up. But until the practice of vipassana is complete, attachment will continue to arise, and the second group of 5 khandhas will still happen. There will still be the groups of clinging. But if vipassana is carried to completion, if this is done properly and fully, then there will be the pure khandhas, where there can never be any more attachment again. And then the mind is truly at peace, truly calm and undisturbed, whether it is walking, sitting, talking, listening, or whatever. These activities can go on, but there is no attachment to any of the khandhas, and no attachment to the activity of the khandhas. This is the result, this is the fruit of the practice of vipassana. So we want you to understand this so that you know why you are practicing meditation. You're practicing meditation so that there will be vipassana, and through vipassana, this fruit of the ending of the burdens, of the aggregates of clinging, so that there are only the pure aggregates remaining. This is what vipassana is about, and we point this out to you so that you will have the motivation and desire to practice. If you have this strong determination and desire to get rid of this burden of the 5 aggregates of clinging, if you truly are tired of this burden and want to put it down, then you will put sufficient energy into vipassana. So we want you to understand the fruits of vipassana so that you will be able to give it the energy and determination that is required. It all comes down to the question of attachment or non-attachment. This is the issue, whether there is attachment to the khandhas or there is non-attachment to any of the khandhas. This is the central point. What's interesting here is that when attachment arises, the thing that attaches is the same thing as what is attached to. We usually talk about the 5 khandhas as the things attached to. These are the objects or bases of clinging. But when we ask, what is it that attaches, what clings, it's the same thing. Specifically, it's the 4th khandha, sankhara khandha, the thinking aggregate, which clings. When there is misunderstanding and a wrong kind of thinking arises, this is attachment. Attachment is just a form of wrong thinking, confused, misunderstood, thinking that is conditioned by misunderstanding or ignorance. This is what attachment is. Sometimes this fourth khandha, this attachment, will go and attach to itself. It will attach to thinking. Thinking attaches to thinking. Or sometimes it will attach to one of the other khandhas. This wrong kind of thinking will attach to the feelings or the body, the perceptions, or the bare sense awareness. Or sometimes this sankhara will go and attach to something external. It will attach to the khandhas of some other being. And so it will attach to external khandhas as well. So it's just the khandhas attaching to khandhas. This is what it comes down to. And then there are khandhas where nothing is attaching to them. When there is attachment, dukkha arises. When there is no attachment, no dukkha arises. And so the question of attachment is central to our problems and to this thing we call dukkha. But all that exists are the khandhas. But sometimes they are ignorant khandhas that are attaching to themselves. We've talked about what is attached to and what attaches, which is the same thing. Now we'd like to talk about the forms attachment takes. Generally, we can speak of two kinds of attachment. There are two different forms of attachment. The first is the attachment to something as I, or the Pali word is atta. To attach to something as the self, as I, as me. I am this. This is the first form of attachment. The I am this, the I, the atta attachment. The second kind of attachment is attachment to things associated with the I. And in English we usually call this the mine, M-I-N-E, attachment. I am this, that is mine, that is mine. This is the second kind of attachment. So the two forms of attachment are I and mine. This is how we translate it in English. The Buddha used the word atta. Atta is that feeling or thought of some separate individuality, which I am. That's atta. Attaniya is the second form, and we want to explain this a little bit so you don't misunderstand what is meant by mine. Attaniya means dependent on the I, or dependent on the atta, or we could say related to, associated with the atta. This is attaniya, the second form of attachment. For example, there is the atta, I, and then the children, the wife and children of the atta is attaniya. The wife and children are dependent on the atta. So that is the my children, my wife, or my possessions, my car, my house, my clothes. This is attaniya. Sometimes it goes so far as that there is the atta attaches to itself as myself. So there is the attaniya attachment, which is dependent on the atta, on the I, can attach to itself. So the I attaches to itself as myself. But still there are these two basic kinds of attachment, atta and attaniya. For example, life. Generally there's the attachment of atta towards life. I am life. I am this khandha, that khandha, I am the khandhas. But often we attach to it as my life as well. The ignorance is confusing us so much that we can't even make up our minds about our attachments. And so we attach to it as my life, or the life, I am my life, is how complicated it can get within our confused minds. But basically there are the two forms of attachment. The I and mine attachments. Attachment to atta, and attachment to ataniya, things which are dependent on the atta, or the self. When there is this naturally occurring level of attachment, which we call atta and ataniya, I and mine. This is kind of an instinctual attachment that happens within all sentient beings. But when this basic instinctual level of attachment is conditioned by kilesa, by defilement, when the defilements come into play, then this attachment is much stronger. There can be a much stronger degree of attachment. And the Buddha had a separate set of words for this cruder, coarser, more strong and fierce level of attachment. These words are ahangara and mamamgara. Ahangara and mamamgara. In Thai, there's a convenient word to express this. There's the word gu, which is a crude personal pronoun. In English, we just have the one pronoun I, but in Thai they have many different pronouns that mean I. Some of them are very refined, such as chan, very polite, and others are very crude, the way GIs talk or something. And so gu is a very crude level of attachment, very strong and defiled attachment. And then there is kongu, or what is possessed by the gu. So this is a stronger level of attachment. In English, we can't think of words to really translate ahangara and mamamgara like we can translate into Thai. All we can think of is I and mine. So there's the I and mine attachment that is on the naturally occurring instinctual level. But it also this attachment has levels and degrees. It can get stronger and stronger and stronger. And so if we had different kinds of I, a more subtle I, and then stronger and bigger, cruder forms of I, we could express this easily. But we only have the one pronoun, I. But the attachment has degrees and levels, depending on the amount of ignorance that is conditioning the mind, depending on how much kilesa or defilement is involved. So there's basically the two kinds of attachment, but there's also a matter of degree and strength within that attachment. If you can think of some words in English to express this, we can have I and mine as the basic level. But if you can think of words for the stronger levels of attachment, please let us know. So the matter of degree is of interest and importance. There's the normal level, the ordinary, natural, instinctual level of I and mine, of atta and ataniya. It's attachment, and it causes dukkha, but it's not a particularly powerful form. But then if this instinctual I is let out of control, if it's not kept within control, it will get bigger, fatter, it will become proud and arrogant. And so then we can maybe for now say that there is the arrogant I and the arrogant mind, the proud I, such as Lucifer when he was shaking his fist at God and trying to take over the show. We can have this much stronger, prouder, arrogant level of attachment of the arrogant I and the arrogant mind. These are much hotter, much heavier, and stir up a lot more dukkha. So we have these two pairs of words in Pali, atta and attaniya, I and mine, and then ahangara and mamamgara, the arrogant I and the arrogant mind. Ajahn Buddhadasa has left it up to me to find out the best words to translate this into English. He already did it for translating it into Thai. And anybody who wants to help me is welcome to. But don't get caught up just in the level of words in this discussion we have going here about the levels of attachment, because the real place to study these is not in the lecture hall or in your notebook, but is in experience. The real place to note these is in the awareness within one's own mind. There is where the attachment is taking place. It's not taking place theoretically. It's taking place in actuality. And so to observe that, be aware that sometimes there is a kind of ordinary, regular kind of I in mind. It's not very strong, and it really doesn't disturb the mind a whole lot. It's not completely peaceful, but it doesn't drive the mind crazy. Ordinary, sane people are able to function fairly well with this level of attachment. It brings dukkha, but not usually real horrible, terrible dukkha. But usually also there are times where this natural I in mind, this ordinary level, gets out of control. It becomes proud and arrogant. It gets caught up in defilement. And then it's much hotter and heavier and fiercer, and much more dukkha arises out of this. And this is the dukkha that can really mess up our lives. This is the kind of dukkha, this is the arrogant I that can go insane and really has problems in life. Watch these levels of attachment. See the many different levels that attachment can happen on. Basically, we can talk about the ordinary level and the really strong, fierce, arrogant level. But there are many gradations, many degrees. And you can observe these as they happen within your own awareness. That's the place to study, within the mind, not within the talking. So be aware of these, because if, for a beginning, you can at least keep this I in mind under control, keep it from getting too fat and too arrogant, that will eliminate a lot of useless dukkha by just keeping this under control. Now, keeping it under control means there is still this illusion of I in mind, of atta and attaniya, but the dukkha conditioned by that attachment won't be so terrible. But still there is dukkha, and so we need to eliminate this atta and attaniya as well. Once the attachment to I and mine is eliminated, then there will be no more problem with the arrogant I and the arrogant mind. So essentially the practice of Dhamma is eliminating this illusion, this misunderstanding that leads to attachment to things as I and mine. And then there will not be the cruder and fiercer levels of attachment, which we call ahangara and mamamgara. So we have these two kinds of attachment, the I attachment, atta, and the mine attachment, attaniya. If we examine both of these, we will see that each kind of attachment has a result or a fruit. The result of the I attachment is selfishness, and the result of the mine attachment is also selfishness. The result of both kinds of attachment are selfishness. When we have the I attachment, there, with this feeling of I, this attachment to I, leads to a kind of selfishness where one is unwilling to give in any way. One cannot be humble. One cannot accept anything. So if we're discussing something with someone, no matter what, we cannot accept what we're saying. Our own pride and arrogance is so strong that we only stick to I. And we're unwilling to accept or listen with an open mind. This is the arrogant. The I leads to an arrogant kind of selfishness, which is very prejudiced and biased. This is the kind of selfishness that makes it impossible for us to agree, to have conversations where we are truly open and listening to each other. It's this kind of selfishness that prevents communication, honesty, friendship between human beings, because of this kind of attachment leading to this selfishness. And even the highest levels on this planet, at the United Nations, where there is supposed to be occurring agreements between nations, where nations are supposedly working together for peace, because this selfishness is so strong, this arrogant, selfish attachment is so strong, that they're often unable to make any agreements, or the agreements that are passed are so wishy-washy as to have very little meaning. They're always passing resolutions that mean almost nothing, because nobody can give up this attachment. There's so much selfishness that everybody is too much sticking to their own position. And so there's this kind of selfishness interfering on all levels of life, in our personal lives and in the larger scales of world politics, where this selfish attachment, where this arrogant selfishness interferes. With the mine attachment, the ataniya, where we attach to something as mine, then it is the kind of selfishness where we're unable to give. It's mine. I can't give it to you. There's this kind of selfishness where attaching to things is mine. We cannot give them to others. And so this is another destructive kind of selfishness. So much of us is trying to possess things and accumulate things and keep them, and we're unable to give things to others. And this also causes much harm and damage, not only in our own lives, but in the world around us as well. So we can see that both kinds of attachment lead to selfishness. There are these two kinds of selfishness: the arrogant I kind of selfishness and the stingy selfishness that comes from the mine attachment. In fact, both kinds of these attachments, it's really just attachment. It's just one kind of attachment. But to understand it better, we can talk about the different forms it takes. And so we're speaking about this to make it most clear to you. This selfishness, this arrogant selfishness and this stingy, greedy, miserly selfishness are things that we can see very clearly in our own lives, in our own minds. And so we talk about it in this way to help you study it in your own lives, where these things ought to be most clear. If you don't see them clearly, then make it clear. Do what you have to do to see these things clearly, so that you understand and will be willing to do something about the situation. Actually, these two forms of attachment work together. Or we could just say it's the same attachment. You can say it's the same, or that these two kinds of attachment are so closely associated that they're inseparable. We talk about it often in terms of two forms of attachment, but we can just as well talk about it as the same attachment. To explain this, when the I arises, then there arises the mind. There's no mind without the I, but almost always the mind will arise with the I, or right afterwards. For example, when the I is born in the mind, when the I comes into the mind, then there will be my illness, my aging, my death. Because of the birth of the I, then there is also my this, my that. Usually illness, or actually illness, growing old, and death are just natural processes. They don't belong to anyone or anything. They're just natural occurrences. But when the I is born in the mind, then there is also the mind, and the mind is attaching to illness as my illness, growing old as my growing old, and death as my death. So this is how, when the I arises, it starts accumulating things. So the I attachment is almost always associated with the mind attachment. Atta and attaniya are really inseparable like this. We can't really take them apart. We can't make a clear separation between them. It's basically the same attachment. So sometimes if we only use the word self or atta, you can assume that within that we're also talking about the mind attachment, the attaniya. So when we say not self, we're also saying not mine, not I, not mine. So when we use, sometimes, since we don't have a lot of time, we don't always go into complete detail when speaking. So sometimes if we say just atta, we're also meaning attaniya, I and mine. So this is how the attachment is basically one attachment. Its attachment is always the same. But we can also talk about it having the form of I and the form of mine. Now we come back to the khandhas, or Rupa Khandha, the first of the 5 khandhas. Rupa Khandha, the corporeality aggregate or materiality aggregate. Sometimes we just say body aggregate. This is Rupa Khandha. So here we are with this body, this physical material thing we call a body. And then there is the I attachment arises and clings to the body as I. I am the body. I am this body. There is the I attachment on Rupa Khandha. And then the I wants to use the body for something it wants. It has something it wants to get from the body. And then we have the mine attachment arising. It's my body. And so we have these two kinds of attachment arising towards the body as I and the body as mine. They arise almost together or together. And so with the Rupa Khandha, we can attach to it in these two ways, as I and as mine. There's the I that thinks, there's the kind of thinking that identifies with the body, and then the kind of thinking that wants something out of the body. And so it has a mind, my body, for me to do with as I want. Also, there can be attachment to external bodies, things associated with the body. These can be attached to as well. So this is attachment to the body. In this way, the body, or corporeality, materiality, is made into something heavy. The attachment is a burden, and it turns the body into a burden. And this is how the body becomes a burden of life, a burden upon life, through the attachment to it. On the other hand, when there is no attachment, the body is not a burden in any way. This is the thing that you need to observe within yourself. Observe the arising of this attachment. Look carefully and see when there is attachment to the body as I, when there is attachment to the body as mine, or when there is attachment to external objects as mine. Be aware of this, the working and activity of attachment, so that you see it clearly. And then you'll understand how terrible and heavy the burden of life is. So whenever the attachment of I arises, whenever the I is born, there automatically comes with it the attachment of mind. There's this double attachment or double illusion taking place. For example, with the body, there is attachment to I, the body. And then also the body becomes mine, because the I is arising through, with the I there is some kind of craving involved, and it wants something out of the body. And so the body is mine for me to use, to get what I want. So the I in the mind, this double attachment is taking place. Or with the feelings, there is some feeling about a sense object, liking, disliking, or uncertainty. There is feeling taking place. And then there is attachment to the feeling as I. Because of ignorance is attaching, ignorance is conditioning attachment. The ignorant mind cannot just feel. It must have an I who feels. The mind that doesn't understand the way things are is always looking for the I. It's always asking who feels. It's always trying to find the I and is always asking who. So it takes the feeling and makes it into I. I am feeling, or I am the feeling. And then this ignorance also leads to the attachment to my feelings. The feelings, instead of there just being feeling, there arises the attachment of I, who am feeling, and the my feelings. And so in this way there's this double attachment arising. Or with perceiving, with sanya. When there is perception of male or female, or tall, short, or some kind of memory, some remembrance, when the sanya kanda is functioning, instead of there just being perceiving, there must be the I, the perceiver. Ignorance is conditioning this attachment again to perception. And so there is I, the perceiver. And this I has my perceptions. And so what is just an activity is personalized through this attachment. And we get this double illusion of I and mine. I, the perceiver, and my perceptions. The same thing happens with the thinking, with sankhara kanda. The activity of thought is taking place, and then who is thinking? Oh, I'm thinking, I think. my thoughts. And this is what is exemplified by the famous quote by Descartes, cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. Just because this very clearly shows this attachment, where because of misunderstanding, this thinking is assumed to be an I, the thinker, and the thinker has my thoughts. So I and mine are attaching to thinking. The double attachment happens with each of the khandas. And with the vijnana khanda, the bare awareness of sense objects through one of the 6 sense doors, through the eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, or mind. There is this vijnana, this knowing of the sense object, the sense stimuli. And this is attached to as I who know, the knower, and my awareness, my knowing, the things I know. And in this way, with each of the 5 khandas, there's this double, this 2-level or 2-tiered or double-story attachment taking place of I and mind. Maybe if there was just the I attachment, it wouldn't be so heavy. But there's the I, and then the mind comes in on top of it and really weighs things down. We're really putting a lot of weight on these 5 khandas through attaching to them as both I and mind. Always this double attachment. Please don't believe what we're telling you or memorize things in books as if you were going to go have to take a test somewhere. What we're telling you here isn't for you to pass any examination which you would do on paper. This is all about passing the examination of life, which means eliminating dukkha. To pass this examination of eliminating dukkha, book knowledge is of no use, and what we're talking about is of no use. To eliminate dukkha, you have to see this as it's happening in your own life. So we talk about it here to aid you in studying the attachments that are really happening. The attachments we talk about is just the words about it. But see the real thing within the mind. Study these and see them clearly. See how each of the 5 khandas is burdened by this double-barreled attachment of I and mine. And see all the dukkha that is conditioned because of that. Now don't think that there are just these 5 things to attach to. And so it must be, since there's only 5 things, it must be quite easy to control this problem of attachment. When we usually talk about the 5 khandas, we talk about these 5 things we've been talking about so far. But we can also talk about a group of 30 things which go by a different name, but are still basically the 5 khandas. So we have a group of 30 things which are called the ayatana, and things associated with the ayatana. The ayatana are the sense spheres. So these are the sense spheres and their associated things. And so we have a group of 30 things, which are still basically the 5 khandas. So to explain this, we have these 30 things are made up of 5 groups of 6. The first group of 6 are the sense organs. The eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, and mind. When the eye sees something, there's often attachment to the eye. This eye. The letter I attaches to the sense organ eye. Or maybe we're interested in what the ear is listening to, and then there's attachment to the ear. Or there some interesting odors coming to the nose, and we attach to the nose, I am the nose. Or there can be attachment to the body, the skin. Somebody hits us, and we say, don't hit me. We attach to the body, sense organ. Or there can be attachment to the mind, the sense organ, when it has a thought or an emotion or something. We can attach to the mind as I. So the first of these groups are the sense organs. The second group is the sense objects, which we can also attach to as atta, as self. The sights or forms and shapes that are seen, these can be attached to as I. Or the sounds are attached to. Smells that come in through the nose. Tastes, flavors that are sensed with the tongue and mouth. Touches. And lastly, ideas and emotions. These 6 things can also be attached. These 6 things can also be attached to. The 6 sense objects can be attached to as I. The third group is what we call patsa, or contact. When the eye sees a form or a shape, there is contact between the two. And this can be attached to. This contact between sense organ and sense object can be attached to. Whether it's between eye and form, hear or ear and sound, nose and smell, tongue and flavor, body and touch, or mind and thought or emotion. These contacts between sense organ and sense object can be attached to. The fourth group of 6 is the awareness of the sensing, the sensory awareness, which is the basic knowing of seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, or thinking. And then the last group of 6, or with that fourth group, this is vijnana, this awareness of each of the 6 kinds of sense activity. And then lastly, the fifth group of 6 things are vedana. There is vedana, there is eye vedana, a feeling towards the eye experience, the visual experience, feeling towards the hearing experience, the activity of hearing, or towards the object of the hearing. This all can be attached to. There can be attachment to smelling, or to what is smelled. There are feelings about the smelling can be attached to. Feelings about tasting, touching, and about thinking, or feelings about the emotions going on in the mind. These are all things that can be attached to. We have these 5 groups: the sense organs, sense objects, sense contact, sense awareness, and then feelings. And these 5 groups are divided according to the 6 ayatana, or sense spheres. So now we have 30 things to attach to. Really, these 30 are no different than the 5 khandhas. But when we realize that there are these 30 things, then you see how easy it is to attach to all these different things. There are all these things happening, and it's so easy for the mind that is conditioned by ignorance, by the mind that lacks correct knowledge, to attach to one of these 30 things. So this attachment is going on all the time. We often talk about attachment to the 5 khandhas, or we can give it a different name and talk about attachment to the 30 spheres, the 30 sense spheres, and things associated with them, the 30 ayatana. We use different names, but it's still attachment to the 5 khandhas, but there are different ways of describing it. So don't let the different names confuse you. What's being talked about is essentially the same thing. Actually, there are more than 30, if we want to look at it this way. 60, 100, 200, however many we want to see it. We talked about these 30 things. After the feelings, there is sanya, perception. And we can talk about perceptions regarding the eyes, ears, etc. So 6 kinds of perception. And after perceptions, there's intention, an attention arising in the mind, intention to do this or that. And this attention, there are 6 kinds of intention, and then desires, and thinking, and all kinds of stuff. So there are many, many different sets and groups that are arising in this whole thing. And so we can talk in terms of 60, or 100, or 200, or how many ever we wanted to. We could go on and on with this, but we're afraid that you would fall asleep. So we're not going to go into all these 10s and 100s and 30s and everything. The point is that we can talk in terms of dozens or hundreds or whatever, but no matter how detailed and how much we cut everything up into little groups and categories and lists and all this, it all comes back to the 5 khandhas. We can go into incredibly exquisite detail on all these things, and you might all fall asleep or at least not be able to follow what we're talking about. But the essential beginning point of it all are just the 5 khandhas. So we're not going to go into all these details. And those of you who have been or will be reading books about Buddhism, if you read something by some professor somewhere who's all caught up in the detail, don't let it confuse you. Just bring it back to the 5 khandhas, because that's where it's all happening. So from now on, we're going to be talking in terms of the khandhas. We'll keep things fairly simple. We can talk in great detail if we wish, but it's still talking about the same thing, the khandhas, and attachment or non-attachment regarding the khandhas. We'd like to summarize everything that needs to be said about the khandhas with a very, very special quote from the Buddha. And Ajahn Buddhadasa just recited it in the Buddha's language for you. This is a very meaningful passage, and it's put in verse. And here at Suan Mok, every morning the monks chant this within the chanting service. It's one of the most meaningful of the small chants we do. And in fact, it's been translated and the translations for it are around here someplace. I don't know if anybody has seen them, but it's been translated into English as well. Here at Suan Mok, when we chant in Pali first, one line of Pali, and then the Thai translation. But we've also got some chants where it's Pali and English. So we will go through this chant in Pali and explain it to you. Actually, it's not a chant, it's a short poem which the Buddha recited, which is now chanted by many monks. เจ้าทั้งหมดก็อันนี้ข้อต่อไปภาระ5โลจะปุคคัลโลเดี๋ยวครับผมไม่ได้อธิบายจะบอกทางเฉพาะว่าขันธ์5เป็นของหนักขนาดไหน The first line of this ปัญทะแรกภาราฮาเวปัญจขันธาขันธ์ทั้ง5เป็นของหนักเว้ยภาราฮาเวปัญจขันธา means the 5 khandhas are burdens. Woi means something like for sure, with It's like maybe in English it's just better to use an exclamation point. But the 5 khandhas are heavy burdens for sure. The Buddha in this line, because it's a verse, he had to make things fit, so he only said the khandhas. And don't misunderstand this. What he's talking about in this case is the 5 upadana khandhas, the second set of khandhas where there is attachment, the groups of clinging. These are the burdens. The khandhas where there is no attachment are not a burden, but the full meaning of the word khandha, especially as we sentient beings are concerned, is the upadana khandhas, the aggregates or groups of clinging. Without any clinging, these things are no problem, but they become these burdens once there is attachment. So the first line is the 5 groups of clinging are heavy burdens. Why?
interjection มีไหว้สำหรับพูดกับคนโง่
You understood that? He said this interjection, why, is being used when speaking to foolish or stupid people.
และบทต่อไปว่าภาระ5โลจะปุคคโลแปลว่าบุคคล person บุคคลและเป็นผู้แบกของหนักพาไป
The next line is para haro jabukalo.
บุคคลและเป็นผู้แบกของหนักพาไป
The person, this means the person, the individual, and the carrying, or the person and the carrying of the heavy burden.
บุคคล person นี่ต้องใส่ไว้ใน inverted comma หมายความว่าตัวตนน่ะถ้ามันมีความรู้สึกเป็นตัวตนมาขึ้นมาเมื่อไหร่บุคคลมันจะเกิดขึ้นมาเมื่อนั้นถ้าไม่มีความรู้สึกว่าตัวตนบุคคลไม่มีนั่นคำว่าบุคคลในที่นี้มันเป็นมายาเป็น illusive ต่อเมื่อมีความรู้สึกเป็นตัวตนน่ะไอ้สิ่งที่เรียกว่าบุคคลจะเกิดขึ้นมาถ้าไม่มีความยึดถือว่าตัวตนบุคคลจะไม่มีนั้นถ้าว่าบุคคลเป็นผู้แบกภาระหนักพาไปก็คือว่าเมื่อมันโง่ว่ามีตัวตนนั่นแหละคือบุคคลในที่นี้บุคคลซึ่งเป็น illusive ดึงมาจากยึดถือว่าตัวตนนั่นแหละจะเป็นผู้แบกของหนักอันนี้จึงพูดว่า person ต้องอยู่ใน inverted comma เป็นผู้แบกของหนักพาไป
So when we talk about this person and the carrying of the heavy burden, this word person should be put in inverted commas or quotation marks because there's no real thing, there's no real person. This is that atta again, that I. The person is another illusion. It's another figment of the attached mind. Through attachment there arises this person. Without attachment there is no person. So we ought to put this word person in quotation marks so that we realize that it's just an illusion. It's this illusion of a person, of a self, of the atta that carries this heavy burden of the 5 upadana khandhas.
เมื่อไม่มี attachment ว่าตัวตนก็ไม่มีบุคคลธรรมดาบุคคลไม่มีแต่พอมียึดถือว่าตัวตนนั่นแหละคือบุคคลจะเกิดความรู้สึกเป็นบุคคลขึ้นมาคำว่าบุคคลในที่นี้มันหมายถึงไอ้ตัวตนที่เกิดขึ้นมาจากอวิชชาจากความยึดมั่นถือมั่นจงสังเกตดูดีท่านกล่าวไว้ว่าบุคคลถ้าไม่มีบุคคลไม่มีการแบกต่อเมื่อมีบุคคลจึงมีการแบกบุคคลจะมีต่อเมื่อมีความยึดมั่นว่าตัวตนเป็นนั้นว่าบุคคลลมๆแรงๆมันจะเกิดขึ้นเป็นตัวตนแล้วก็มันก็แบกภาระหนักอันนี้นี่ว่าข้อที่2
So with the second line, paraharo jabukalo. The heavy burden and the one who carries it, the person who carries it. It's only through attachment that this person arises, and so there can only be the carrying of the burden with this when there is a person, and there's only the person when there is attachment. So it's very clear and obvious that all the weight and burden that we carry around with us in the mind, that the mind carries, is being carried by this idea or self. This idea or illusion of self is what carries the burden around.
บรรทัดต่อไปว่าภาราทานังทุกขังโลเกภาราทานังทุกขังโลเกการแบกของหนักเป็นความทุกข์ในโลกคือการแบกของหนักในโลกเป็นความทุกข์นี่ธรรมดามากก็จะฟังออกอยู่แล้วเมื่อแบกของหนักก็ต้องมีความทุกข์การแบกของหนักในโลกเป็นความทุกข์หรือแบกของหนักเป็นความทุกข์ในโลกก็เหมือนกัน
The next line is parathanang tukang loke, parathanang tukang loke, which means the carrying of burdens is dukkha, is tukka in this world. Or we can also say the carrying of burdens in this world is tukka. We can translate it either way.
หมายความว่าความทุกข์มันมีอยู่แต่ในโลกมันมีแต่คนโง่ในโลกมีแต่คนโง่เขาจึงแบกของหนักความทุกข์จึงมีในโลกแก่ผู้แบกของหนักถ้าเขาฉลาดเขาขึ้นเหนือโลกแล้วเขาไม่แบกของหนัก
And to look at this more carefully, this means that dukkha comes into the world. We bring dukkha into the world through the carrying of these burdens. And so dukkha takes place in the world. And the carrying of these burdens is a worldly thing. For the mind that transcends the world, that is no longer caught up in or attached to the world, there are no more burdens. And so dukkha takes place in the world through the carrying of burdens in that world. When the mind is free of the world and no longer trapped within worldly conditions, then we say the mind is beyond or above the world. And then there is no burden. The burdens take place in the world, and that's where the tukka is as well.
สรุปความว่าของหนักมีอยู่แต่ในโลกของคนโง่ของหนักมีอยู่แต่ในโลกของคนโง่
We can summarize that by saying that tukka is only in the world of fools. Tukka is only in the world of fools.
บรรทัดต่อไปภาระนิเขปนังสุขังโยนทิ้งของหนักไปเสียเป็นความสุขคือไม่ทุกข์ไม่มีความทุกข์โยนทิ้งของหนักไปเสียไม่มีความทุกข์เป็นความสุขมีแต่ในโลกของคนฉลาดโยนทิ้งของหนักไปเสียมีแต่ไม่มีทุกข์ภารานิเคภาระนิเคปนังภาระนิเคปนังโยนทิ้งของหนักไปเสียสุขังเป็นสุข
The next line is para nike panang sukhang. To toss away, to throw away the burdens is bliss or is happiness. To throw away all the burdens is happiness. And the meaning of this line is that when there are only intelligent people, then there is no dukkha in the world. But fools take upon themselves all these burdens. When there are wise, intelligent beings, then there are no burdens taken up, and there is only bliss.
การโยนทิ้งของหนักมีแต่ในโลกของคนฉลาด
The throwing away of burdens only happens in the world of intelligent ones or intelligent beings.
โลกของคนฉลาดมีชื่อเรียกอีกอย่างหนึ่งก็คือเหนือโลกซูเปอร์มันเดนหรืออันตรามันเดนแล้วแต่เราก็ยังเรียกกันในโลกของคนฉลาดที่จริงคนฉลาดมันอยู่เหนืออิทธิพลของโลกของคนฉลาดก็คือเหนือโลก
And when we say the world of intelligent people or wise people, the name we usually use for this is above the world. We can call it the super mundane realm or the ultra mundane realm or whatever. So when we say the world of intelligent people, we're talking about transcendence of the world of fools, transcendence of the world of duality. This is the world of intelligent, wise people where the burdens are thrown away.
ทีนี้ยาวหน่อย นิคขิปิตวาครุงภารังอัญญังภารังอนาดิยะนิคขิปิตวาครุงภารังอัญญังภารังอนาดิยะแปลว่าเมื่อโยนทิ้งของหนักนี้ไปแล้วอย่าหยิบเอาของหนักอื่นขึ้นมาอีกนิคขิปิตวาครุงภารัง
นิคขิปิตวังครุงภารัง
อัญญังภารังอนาดิยะ
อนังภารังอนาริยะ The meaning of this is once the burdens have been thrown away, don't go and pick up any new ones. Once you've thrown away, once these burdens have been tossed away, don't pick up any new burdens.
เพราะตามธรรมดาเราพอทิ้งของหนักอันนี้เดี๋ยวก็หยิบของหนักอันอื่นขึ้นมาอีกคือว่ายึดถืออันนี้แล้วเดี๋ยวก็มายึดถืออันนี้อีกแล้วเดี๋ยวก็ยึดถืออันนี้อีกเดี๋ยวก็ยึดถืออันนั้นอีกอย่างนี้เรียกว่าโยนของหนักอันนี้ไปแล้วหยิบของหนักอันอื่นขึ้นมาอีกนี่ใช่ไม่ได้
You laughed, but when we say don't pick up any new ones, this is what we're constantly doing. We're always picking up this one, we put it down, we pick up another one, put it down, pick up another one. So even when we manage to put down one of these burdens, the mind goes and attaches to something else and picks up another burden. So this is why we have to be reminded, once we let go of something, once it's tossed, a burden is tossed away, be careful not to replace it with a new burden. Toss away the old burdens and don't pick up any new ones.
ต่อไปอันบัดสุดท้ายว่าสมูลังตันหังอภุยหะนิจชาโตปรินิพพุโตถอนตัณหาขึ้นเสียหมดกระทั่งรากถอนรากของตัณหาออกหมดแล้วก็จะไม่มีความร้อนแล้วก็จะเย็นสนิทไม่มีความร้อนนิจชาโตปรินิพพุโตก็เย็นสนิท
The final two lines are
ตัณหารวมทั้งรากของมันถอนกันสมูลังพร้อมทั้งรากตัณหังตัณหาอัปปุยหะถอนขึ้นสมูลังตัณหังอัปปุยหะ
means
นิจชาโตปรินิพพุโต
pulling up craving. Craving is ignorant desire conditioned by misunderstanding. pulling up craving by the roots, complete with its roots, is the end of all fires and is tranquil coolness. So the pulling up of craving by its roots is the end of fire and heat, and is great peace and coolness.
เมื่อถอนตัณหาหมดแล้วมันไม่มีอุปาทานไม่มี attachment มันก็ไม่มี attachment มันไม่มีตัณหาซึ่งเป็นเหตุให้เกิดอุปาทานมันก็ไม่มีอุปาทานมันก็ไม่มีความยึดถือมันก็ไม่ร้อนเพราะกิเลสแล้วมันก็เย็นสนิทเป็นนิพพานเย็นเป็นนิพพาน
When craving is completely pulled up, then there is no attachment. Attachment is conditioned by craving. And when we say pull up craving by the roots, it means pulling up the causes of craving as well, which is ignorance or avijja. So by pulling out the roots of craving, then there is no more attachment. When there is no attachment, then the fires of the defilements go out. The defilements are very, very hot. They're constantly burning and scorching the mind. But when craving is uprooted, then the fires go out, and what remains is nibbana. Nibbana is coolness. It is spiritual tranquility. This is what remains with the end of these fires, and when the mind is no longer carrying these burdens. We'd like to emphasize that the lines or the words, the end of fires and complete coolness, does not mean death. When we say total coolness, this is full nibbana. But nibbana is not death. We're not saying coldness. Coldness is death. But coolness is not death. Coolness is between the extremes of fire and ice, or heat, hot and cold. Coolness is what remains. This is not death. There are still the 5 khandhas, but these are the pure khandhas without any attachment. There's no more ignorance to condition any attachment to the khandhas. So the khandhas are cool. Life is cool. The khandhas are still there and they still function. They can carry on all the functions of what we call a sentient being. But now that is done without any attachment. So it is the functioning of an enlightened being. And this is coolness. So there are the cool, pure khandhas. This life is only the pure, cool khandhas. There are no more of those heavy, burdensome khandhas that come about through ignorant attachment. The defilements, greed, hatred, and confusion, are hot. Attachment is hot. Being a slave to the defilements is hot. Carrying the burdens of the groups of clinging is hot. Being a slave to the Vedana is hot. All these things are hot. They are fires which burn the mind. When all these fires go out, when these fires are extinguished, this is coolness. Coolness is the going out of all the fires. And this coolness is the meaning of Nibbana. We'll go through it one last time without explanations, just the basic meaning. The 5 khandhas are heavy burdens. Right. The person is the one who carries these heavy burdens. The carrying of these burdens is dukkha in the world. Throwing away those burdens is bliss. Once you've thrown away these burdens, don't pick up any new ones. Pulling up desire, completely pulling up desire completely by its roots is the end of the fires and is total coolness. So this verse can be used like a mantra, as is used like in the Tibetan Buddhism. So you can use this as a mantra because it has a lot of meaning. If you're going to use a mantra, you should use one that has meaning. So you can use this as a mantra. Or if you like to sing songs, you can sing this. Especially every time there is attachment rising, you can start to paraharo, and so the attachment will fade away. I'll type this up and put it on the bulletin board for anybody who would like it, with the Pali and an English translation. So this is a summary of the situation we're in with the khandhas. All this attachment and this burdens is occurring in the mind. When we talk about the khandhas, there's the body and the mind. Or in Pali we have the word citta, which is usually translated mind, or mano. There are some different words for this. When we talk about the khandhas, we have 4 khandhas which make up the citta, or the mind. And this is vedana, feelings, sanya, perceptions, sankhara, thinking, and vijnana, sense awareness. So we have these 4 khandhas. This is the mind. The reason there's only one body khandha and 4 mind khandhas is because the mind is much more complex, and as we've been discussing, that's where the problems are happening. When we talk about this relationship between body and mind, we can compare it to a company or a business. Life is a business, and there's the body, which is the activity of the business. The mind is the manager of the business. If there's a good manager, the business will turn a profit. If the manager is stupid, the business will go into debt. So the thing for you to do is to look at your personal little company and see if the manager is wise or stupid. Are you going into debt? Are you picking up all these burdens? Or are you turning a profit? Is life free, cool, and useful? If you find out that the manager is stupid, then fire him. Kick him out and find a wise one. Find an intelligent manager to take over the business. The business is to be a human being, not just an everyday common fool. The business is to be a human being. And to do that, we need a wise manager to run the business. If you can't find a wise manager, then you're just going to have to take that stupid one and train it. Train the stupid manager to be a wise one. Train it to learn from its mistakes. Every time it makes a mistake, it learns the lesson and doesn't repeat the mistake. Teach it to let go of the debts, to let go of the burdens, and to only do what is profitable. So if you fire the stupid manager and get a new one who is wise, or else train the stupid manager so that the business will function properly and will turn a profit, which means it will be a human life and not just ordinary sentient bumbling around and running into dukkha. So this ends today's talk, and we will close our meeting here with a song.
Haraha ve panchakhantha Haraharo cha pukhalo Harathanang tukkhang loke Hara nikhepanang sukhang Nikkipitava kharung parang อัญญังภารังอนาดิยะสมูลังตันหังอภุยหะนิชชาโตปรินิพพุโตปิดประชุมนี่เวลาเปิดประชุมเราจะร้องเพลงนี้เวลาปิดประชุมเราจะร้องเพลงนี้
So that's it for today. Make sure you learn the words by tomorrow, because every time we begin, we're going to begin with this song and then we'll close with it as well. Today we'd like to speak on the topic of the original cause for life becoming a heavy burden or dukkha. The original cause for life becoming a heavy burden or dukkha. The answer to this that we can give right off the bat is that the cause is not knowing the 5 khandhas according to reality. Life becomes a heavy burden because we do not understand the 5 khandhas according to reality. This is the topic we will discuss today. If we were Christians, we would answer this question by saying that the original cause is the eating of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. In the Christian tradition, this is the original sin. This original sin of eating that fruit from that tree which God forbid Adam and Eve to eat. That original sin is the cause of all dukkha. But if we are Buddhists, we don't answer in that way. We say that the original cause of all dukkha is in not understanding the 5 khandhas according to reality. Because of misunderstanding, the idea of I or we arises. Actually, there is only the mind. There's only this thing which is able to know, which is aware, which is sensitive. This is the mind. And one of the functions of the mind is thinking. The mind thinks. Sometimes the mind thinks correctly, in the right way, and we can call this right thinking. Sometimes the mind thinks in the wrong way. It thinks in a way that does not accord with reality. We call this wrong thinking. All there is the mind. The mind that feels, is aware, is sensitive, and that thinks. Sometimes there is wrong thinking, and sometimes there is right thinking. But originally, naturally, ordinarily, there is only this mind. There's only mind. But because of wrong thinking, there arises the illusion of I, of me, of self, of ego, of soul, whatever you want to call it. All of these are illusions, Atman, self, soul, no matter what your conception of them. And these are always arising because of the wrong thinking. Ordinarily, there is only mind. Naturally, there is only mind. But through wrong thinking, there arises the illusion of some separate individual I or self. The mind is one part or component of life. It is paired with the other component, which is body. So there's the mind, which is this one aspect of life which is able to feel, be aware, is sensitive, thinks, and so forth. The mind often is attaching to itself as a self. The mind, through not understanding, through wrong thinking, identifies with the mind itself or one aspect or function of the mind as the self or soul. Such as when the mind is performing the function of feeling, that those feelings that arise towards sense experience, which we call the Vedana. When this function of mind is taking place, the mind will attach to it as I or mine. Or the function of mind that we call sanya, the perceiving of the marks or distinctions of the sense object. When this perception is taking place, the mind will attach to it. Or there's the activity of the mind that we call thinking, and the mind will attach to itself in the function of thinking. Or then there is the sense awareness of some sense activity via the eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, or mind. When this function of the mind is taking place, the mind may go and attach to that as I, as mine. So in this way, the mind is attaching to itself through misunderstanding and wrong thinking. It goes and identifies or clings to one of its functions as the self or soul. Sometimes when the mental activity is fairly quiet, when there is nothing really interesting taking place with these various mental functions, then the body, the functioning of the body will stand out much more clearly. And in moments like this, then the mind will attach to the body as I. Normally, when one of the mental functions is strongest, the mind will attach to one of those and will only attach to the body as my body. But when the activity of the body is most obvious, then the mind may attach to this as I am the body. So this is how, through not understanding the reality of the five khandhas, not seeing the true nature of these things, the burden of life arises. These five khandhas are just activities. They're just natural functions and in those functions there is nothing that is a self. But through not perceiving this truth, this reality, the burden of life arises through attaching to these natural activities as something personal, as something individual, as I or mine. This is the arising of the burden of life. So to repeat as concisely as possible, the burden of life arises from not seeing the five khandhas as they really are. The burden of life comes from not realizing the genuine truth of the five khandhas. This not understanding or the lacking of this knowledge about the way the khandhas really are is called avijja. This is a very, very important word because it stands for something that is very nasty and fierce. And so remember this word. The word is avijja, A-V-I-J-J-A, avijja. Usually we translate this ignorance, but sometimes people don't quite understand what we mean. Avijja means knowing or knowledge. Avijja is not knowing. This is the lack of knowledge. Avijja is where there is not the right knowledge. This is the starting point of the process that conditions dukkha. All dukkha has its starting point in avijja, and therefore avijja is something very, very important to know. Avijja is essentially not understanding all things as they really are. Avijja is not having the correct knowledge about all things. When we say all things, we mean all the phenomena that arise in and before consciousness, all the things that happen within the mind. This is everything. And all of these things, all the things that you can know, experience, feel, see, hear, touch, think, all of these things are no different than the five khandhas. So we can say all things, or we can say the five khandhas. Avijja is not knowing all things as they are in their genuine truth, not perceiving the truth of all things, or not perceiving the truth of the five khandhas. This is avijja. In Dhamma language, the language which has different levels of more profound meaning, which we use to explain the truth. Avijja is darkness. Avijja is darkness. This is a kind of darkness that 100 suns, if we took 100 suns, S-U-N-S, the kind that is up in the sky and that makes the day light. If we took 100 suns, they could still not drive away avijja. Avijja is so powerful, so strong, so dark, that 100 suns cannot clear it away. This is how important avijja is.